So today I'm talking about prayer, and was that a prayer? Yeah. What is prayer? You know, it's better to just let go of what we think we know. You know, one of the biggest problems in this world is everybody thinks they know what they're doing. And they just keep doing it. And prayer is like that. We need to let go of our ideas about prayer. And if you didn't know what prayer was, how would you approach it? First of all, what would your focus be? Well, on God, of course, but what is God? Did you know the word God actually comes from a root that's the old Lithuanian word for sorcerer? It has it's not anything in Latin or Greek or Hebrew. That doesn't mean I don't use the word. I use it because then people know what I'm talking about. I had a classmate of mine in ministerial school who couldn't use the word God. He'd been raised in a rural southern church where the minister would point his finger, red-faced, and tell them about all the horrible flames they'd be dealing with in the afterlife, and use the word God a lot with it, and it was associated with him in such a way that he said, I just can't use that word. And here he was a minister. He built a big church in North Carolina, but he used the word spirit and source and oneness, and I don't think anybody knew unless he told them, because it really doesn't matter what you call your source, as long as you are aligned with your source. I knew a couple when I was serving in Palo Alto who lived just down the street, about 4 blocks from the world headquarters of Hewlett-Packard, and they called God higher power, but they didn't call God higher power, they called God HP. And they said, I drive around this town and I see signs of God everywhere. HP, HP, HP. So it doesn't matter what you call God. It's really what's in your heart. You know, there's that one man who had been in recovery for many years, and again, he had been traumatized with religious abuse in his childhood. And his way of dealing with God was to call God Seymour. And the reason why was because God helped him to see more. And he had it right there on his dashboard in his car. Thank you, Seymour. So how do you relate with God? What's in your heart with God? Are you willing to move past the techniques and the methods and the theology? Oh, theology. They fight wars over theology. You know, sometimes we feel separated in our hearts because we think God is way out there. And God is really in here. God is a higher power, but God is also an inner power. And how do you move into this awareness? You know, sometimes the best way to access God is just to say, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. Together. Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. I find that when I'm going through a crisis in my life, a difficulty in my life, that the simplest spiritual principles are the ones that I forget first. You know, I often forget to just say, thank you, God, for the best and highest opportunity here. Thank you, God, for lifting this up into its highest possibility. Sometimes I just forget all about it. And sometimes it takes getting tired of being stuck for me to remember it. One time when I moved from Hawaii to Palo Alto, actually, they were having a housing shortage. And I think they are still having a housing shortage. And I looked for an apartment. I couldn't find one. Now, there was one apartment complex that was extremely expensive that had a clubhouse and a gymnasium and coaches and all these social events and everything, but I knew I couldn't afford that one. So even though people had told me about it, I just forgot about that one. And I was riding my bicycle all over town because my car hadn't arrived yet, and I was getting tired of doing that. And also, the people I was staying with, do you ever have the feeling that you've stayed just a little bit too long? It was the days were passing, and finally I just said, okay, God, thank you for the best apartment that's available in Palo Alto today. And I just got on my bicycle and I rode it over to that expensive place. And what I found after I rented it was that I saved so much money on gymnasium fees and social events and all kinds of stuff because everything was free there that it actually was the cheapest place in town. Now I was holding myself back and placing a limitation on my consciousness by being locked into a specific outcome. And that's something I want to share here as well. Having an open-ended relationship with prayer. A friend of mine calls this the difference between setting an intention and generating a desire. Now, setting an intention is closed-ended. And it's good to do it sometimes. I mean, I set the intention in the morning to brush my teeth. I brush my teeth, maybe I floss, and I'm done. I know what it is, and it's done. It's a finite thing. But generating a desire is something that is never-ending. It's a constant expansion. It's not locked into form. And so by saying, thank you, God, for the best apartment that's available, I'm letting go. I'm moving with it. And if it's not for me to have an apartment that day, I'm open. Whatever it is. If you've been in a situation where you've been stuck, opening it up, moving from an intention to a desire, is it clear? Move to this consciousness that says, yes, I'm an evolving soul. I'm not locked into form. You know, when I moved to Albuquerque and I'd gotten rid of my car in Florida, and I budgeted $7,000 for a car, and I knew that I was going to find a decent used car in Albuquerque for $7,000. And I looked everywhere, even at a guy in the church who had a car lot. I couldn't find anything for that price, because what I didn't know was that was kind of a town where everybody wanted to buy a cheap used car. And back in Florida, I could have picked one up. So I was really stuck, and I was getting tired of riding my bicycle again. And so it was what do I do? And I realized, okay, you haven't taken the time. And I said, thank you, God, for the best car that's available today in Albuquerque. And I looked down at the one ads in the Albuquerque Journal, and I jumped out. Mazda, 89 Mazda, 34,000 miles, $7,000. Well, I called the number. First thing, it didn't say what model it was. It turns out it was the luxury model. Second of all, 34,000 miles, that's a pretty, young car. But the thing that would have kept me from calling this number is that this was a Mercedes dealer. Now, they would jack up the price, right? Except for they didn't, because they were doing it as a favor to a woman that the owner knew. And I went down there and I got it, except for one thing. The seats were covered with some kind of sticky, gluey substance, some kind of hard substance. And I was thinking, oh man, what do I do? But I just had the feeling, this is the car, get it. I figured, well, okay, I surrendered to it. I went and I took it to a detailing place. Turned out that this woman who had sold him the car had put a lot of sugar in her coffee every day and spilled it over and over and over again. And that was all sugar, and it just got detailed and it got vacuumed out. Now understand this. This isn't about getting a car or getting an apartment, but these are tangible things that we can talk about. This is any yearning of your heart. Be open-ended. And be open-ended in how you pray. There's so many ways to pray. I mean, I'll never forget the time when I was running the Youth of Unity, and it was during the gas shortages in the 1970s. Do you remember that? And there was a guy who was taking the Youth of Unity from Austin to Dallas, and it was late at night, and he didn't have enough gas to get him to Dallas, but he figured he'd find a gas station somewhere on the way, and he couldn't. His car ran out of gas at 1 in the morning, and he coasted his car into a gas station that had a convenience store in it. And all the teenagers didn't care. They were running around the convenience store having a great time. And he saw a payphone. Remember payphones? And he walked over to the payphone. He picked it up. He says, okay, God, this is John. Now, you told me to bring these kids to the rally, and I did what you told me to do, and I need some gas right now because I got to get to the rally, okay? Thank you. Click. And he heard behind him, and he turned around, and he was horrified because he didn't think anybody could hear him. There was a guy who'd been listening in. And he looked at him, he smiled, and the guy smiled at him, and he said, I couldn't help but hear, were you talking to God? And he said, yeah, I was talking to God. And he said, it sounds like you need some gasoline, right? He says, yeah. Well, they didn't have any gasoline there. He says, I'm tearing down a car about 2 blocks away. It's got a full tank. I can siphon some out for you and get you wherever you need to go. Now think about that. It's the simple, heartfelt prayer that makes the difference. And it's not about method, but keeping it simple. Not creating some big distance out there. Because God is a higher power, yes, but God is an inner power. And God is right here. And sometimes just going into your heart and saying, I lift this up to its highest possibility. Together? I lift this up to its highest possibility. Affirmative prayer is a wonderful form of prayer. And as we shared during our time of meditation, the Lord's Prayer was given by Jesus, a series of 7 affirmations, as an answer to the question, how do you pray? But how do you use affirmations? So many of us, how many read Daily Word magazine, Unity's magazine? So many of us just recite the affirmation for the day, but have you ever taken it and moved more deeply with it? I was just on a 9-day retreat at a monastery, and I took affirmative prayer statements, and I moved with them. Most of the time, that's what I was doing in my room. I spent hours working with affirmations, going deeply with them. One of them, turns out, was one of them that they were using in all their services over and over again. How many ex-Catholics are in the room, if you don't mind raising your hand? Well, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. Kyrie eleison. And I was using that, but my meditation teacher, who'd been raised in Unity and wasn't Catholic at all, had told me many months ago that whenever my mind was moving to negativity, that I should keep that going in my mind. So I moved with that, and it really moved me deeper. I had a friend many years ago, about 25 years ago, who was very agnostic and found out I was a minister and said, well, I meditate, but I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, and I really don't know what I believe, but I don't want any of that God stuff. So I read about all the studies that showed that if you use a word or a phrase in meditation and you repeat it over and over again, that it changes your metabolism, it changes your brain waves, it has all these physical effects and psychological effects, and it's been measured over and over again. And so she said, so I use a nonsense word, and I make it non-religious. I said, oh, what's your non-religious nonsense word? She said, Kyrie. I said, oh, Kyrie? How do you spell it? Kyrie. I said, your non-religious nonsense word is the most sacred word in the Catholic Church. It's Kyrie, and it's the word for Lord. It's a Greek word that predates the Latin Mass. And she was horrified, but kept using the Kyrie, now pronouncing it right because of the language, and started having mystical experiences and left the agnosticism behind. But it doesn't matter how you address God. It doesn't matter what you do as long as it works for you. It's unique to you. Your relationship with your higher power is unique to you. And don't let anybody take it away from you or lessen it or think that you have to conform with somebody else's. The image comes to my mind of the sun in the sky and how it glints on the surface of water as I'm looking at it. It glints in a straight line right to me. But if Bruce is standing over here, it's glinting on the water directly to him. And when Doe is standing over here, it's glinting directly to her. That one presence and that one power has a direct link to each one of us. And it's unique to us, and it's custom designed for all of us, because God is what? Infinite. And if God is infinite, God is a multifaceted, infinitely faceted jewel. You can relate with that higher power any way you choose. So for you, God may be impersonal principle. For you, God may be very personal. Father, mother. You may use very traditional language. You may not want to use any language at all. You may call God divine mind. You may think the force is with you. Doesn't matter. How do you access this? And one of the most powerful ways is to use affirmations. It's no accident that Jesus gave that answer of the Lord's Prayer, which was not given in Elizabethan English, but if you really translate it based upon the language of his day, it was just a series of very direct statements, claims on God, positive statements of truth, not requests or begging, but invocations. So how do you relate with that higher power? What do you do every day? My son has on his door Post-it notes with his affirmation of the day. And he's getting a big collection. And he asks in prayer for an affirmation. And one comes to him, and he writes it down, and then he takes it with him if he goes to school, and he works with it. Now, what do I mean by he works with it? How do you work with an affirmation? Well, when he walks the dog, he says it aloud or silently to himself. At night, after we have our prayer time, he goes into meditation, and he takes that affirmation, and he maybe says it aloud, whispers it, says it silently, and moves with it. When I was on my meditation retreat at the monastery, I took that God have mercy, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, and other affirmations that I work with, and I would say them aloud, I would say them silently, I would whisper them. Sometimes I'd break them up into small parts, and I'd move with it, driving it deeply into my consciousness. Driving it deeply into my consciousness. Now, there are different methods that are unique to you that would fit your particular style of processing. And without teaching my class on Tuesday night on how to pray, because I'm going to be getting more deeply into it, I want to give a couple of pointers. And one of them is that each one of us, we access our minds differently. We process in our minds in a different way. There's three basic ways, and many of you have heard of this. You're either auditory, kinesthetic, or visual. How many people have heard of that? Auditory, kinesthetic, and visual? Well, it shows up in prayer. Because if you're auditory, well, what kind of things can you do? You can say your affirmations aloud. You can sing them. You can listen to tapes of yourself or somebody else using affirmations. I have something called the Gift of Healing Meditation that was the best-selling CD that Unity ever put out. It's no longer in print, but I've reprinted it. But I got a stack of testimonials from people who had spontaneous remissions, sometimes of terminal illnesses, listening to and working with it. Now, if you're an auditory person, sometimes that's the best way to work with it, or saying the affirmations out loud. For a person who's visual, what could you do? Well, you could make a treasure map. You could take your affirmations, maybe some pictures, and put them on a piece of paper. You could post affirmations on your mirror. I knew a guy who was a member of the Youth of Unity, and just when he turned about 19, he was driving a Toyota, but he always wanted a British car called a Sunbeam. Now, how many people know what a Sunbeam is? Not many. They don't make them anymore. And there's a reason for that. They weren't the most reliable car ever built, but they're beautiful cars. So he really wanted a Sunbeam. So what he did, well, he remembered a song when he was a kid. It was, they taught it in Sunday school. It was, Jesus wants me for a sunbeam. Did you ever, you know that one? Yeah. Jesus wants me for a sunbeam. So he turned it around. He made a treasure map that said, Jesus wants a sunbeam for me. And got a picture of one in British Racing Green, and he put it up, and in about 4 weeks, he was driving around in his reliable Toyota, and he saw, about 4 blocks from his house, a British Racing Green Sunbeam with a for sale sign on it. But he didn't have any cash, so he figured, well, he had nothing to lose, so he just went and knocked on the door, and he worked out a trade with this person, because this person wanted a reliable car. And so they traded, and he got his Sunbeam, which brings me to having an open-ended attitude in prayer. And wouldn't it be better for us to pray for the highest good, the greatest joy, lifting it up to its highest possibility, the best that's available for us? He did fulfill that desire, and he enjoyed it for a time, until it broke down one time too many, and then he passed it on to the next person who Jesus wanted a Sunbeam for. But for each one of us, we need to know that we are infinite spirit, and we are infinite possibility, and we can open up to the presence of God in prayer, but not making it a big drudgery, a big doing. I want to read a wonderful quote from Norman Vincent Peale about this. He said, "Don't pray with tension. Don't say, 'Oh Lord, please do this for me.' Pray relaxed. Actually, it isn't prayer anyway that gets results. Prayer is only the mechanism. The results don't come from the mechanism, but from the power that's behind that mechanism. So it isn't prayer that answers your prayer. It is God that answers your prayer. The most powerful prayer is to pray in a relaxed, loving, faithful manner, laying your problem before God, letting God take charge of it, giving it to God, not getting tense about it, not working at it, just letting it go and just being. So if you're a visual person, you can just make something and look at it every day and maybe make it open-ended. Now, what about a kinesthetic person? Now, I'm a kinesthetic person, and for kinesthetic people, well, sometimes you need to do something physical, like writing a letter to God, or getting a God box and putting your prayer in the God box to remind yourself that you're entrusting it to God. One woman on the way out of the first service said, I'm kinesthetic and I use prayer beads and I use prayer stones. Now these are physical aids for people who kind of operate on the gut level. Now many of us don't know which way that we process our thoughts and which way would be best. So I'm going to give you a little test here and you can find out probably with certainty which of these three methods you should use. So I'm going to ask you to mentally, silently spell the word chrysanthemum. Now just watch how you do it. Now if you're like me and you're spelling it out with your finger, you're kinesthetic. If you're auditory, you're probably sounding it out like they told you in first or second grade. If you're visual, you're visualizing it. How many people were visualizing it? Oh, most of the people. How many people sounded it out? A few. How about kinesthetic? You're writing with your finger? Just one or two of us. So you work with your style of prayer and then you move with it. Truly, prayer is aligning with the divine plan, aligning with that plan in love and then showing up in it and then moving ahead with it. Prayer is a yearning in your heart, and it's not for things, it's not for outcomes, it's really for a closer connection with your source, whatever you call that source. So I'm just getting feeling that we can move into our time of prayer right now. So just move into this now moment and rest once again in your heart. And just silently say, I lift this up to its highest possibility. I lift myself up into my highest possibility. Thank you, God, for the divine solution to every situation. Thank you, God. I lift everything up to its highest possibility. Best outcome, greatest joy. And just take a moment. Feel that energy. Feel that presence. Thank you, thank you, thank you, God. And so it is. Oh, and join with me in just taking a nice deep breath, moving into this space, the space that's in your heart, remembering that God is an inner power as well as a higher power. And so rest your thought easily in your heart. Just move your whole awareness to that heart space, the center of your being. Withdraw all your attention from everything in the outer and move into your heart. God is an inner power, and God is a higher power. And as we move into our hearts, we're gently lifted up higher, moving out of the space where there are problems and concerns, and into that higher space where everything is fulfilled, where our answers dwell. So once again, take a deep breath. Move your attention into your heart. In this moment, my heart has everything I need. And as I move more and more deeply into this sacred space, the deeper I move, the higher I am lifted. I I'm lifted into that space of all possibilities. I am lifted into my highest possibility. As I rest in my heart. As I move even more deeply into my heart, I feel a great peace, sense of well-being. A sense that all is well. Because I've been lifted to that place of fulfillment, of highest possibility. Thank you, thank you, thank you, God. And so it is. And so now we're going to take our offering statement, which is, I give in a spirit of abundance and I receive abundantly. Together. I give in a spirit of abundance and I receive abundantly. And silently. And again aloud together. I give in the spirit of abundance, and I receive abundantly, and so it is. Amen.